real foods for longevity tend to be peasant foods. The cheap stuff everybody can afford. In America, we hear all the time, you need fresh fruits and vegetables. That's the wrong way to start, especially in the inner city when there are poor people, for two reasons. One, people can't afford it, and it creates an immediate barrier. And number two, people don't know what to do with it. But you give African Americans or Latin Americans or the Italians beans and a grain, they know exactly what to do with it. Africans, the beans and rice. The Latin Americans, beans and corn tortilla. The Italians, pasta fagioli, pasta and beans. And you have a complex carbohydrates, fiber. You have all the amino acids necessary for human sustenance. So the big common denominator is peasants' food made to taste delicious. And that last part, that's the most important ingredient. Taste is the most important ingredient. And these blue zones, they know how to make this very simple food absolutely sing.
Plus a bit of diversity, I think, as well. I mean, when I've gone to visit Japan and Italy and Mediterranean countries, you do see some similarities, actually. I mean, their noodles are the kind of spaghetti, but it's what else they put on the noodles. It's the fact that they have all these different specialty restaurants in Japan that will, use all kinds of different ingredients and, hundreds of different kinds of mushrooms and onions and all these beans and bean sprouts and all these little pickles and fermented foods. And the equivalent, so people think of Japan as just sushi and rice. It's not. When you actually go there, it's very, very different to the sort of the westernized version of what Japanese food is. And it varies a lot between the islands and regions, just like it does in Italy. And so I think, for me, it's that diversity of the foods, the fact that there's great food culture, so people will make all this stuff in their homes that may have had peasant origins, but is still carrying on, and they'll mix stuff together in rich soups and casseroles all the time. And they're having fermented foods as well. I think that's the other thing that we don't really discuss enough is that, in the Mediterranean countries, lots of goat's cheese and yogurts and other dairy ferments. And in Japan, of course, you've got all the misos and the fermented soy products that are eaten regularly. So you've got this diversity and the fermented foods and this food culture that is all about, passing on what your grandmother taught you to the next generation. I think they're also very binding things that identify these very healthy groups.
What does the latest science tell us about those foods? And
well, tell us that Dan's exactly right. Those foods are
good one, Dan. That's good.
and up to recently, we didn't know why they were good. Really, we sort of, because we've had this rather reductionist view of foods that
reductionist meaning
that we take the hundreds of chemicals in any one food and we talk about one of them. So it might be carotene in carrots, or it might be vitamin C in a lemon. And we ignore all the 800 others there. And this is where we've thought about what's good about beans, and we just thought about one thing in beans. It turns out it's the entirety, it's that diversity, not only of the food, but the chemicals within each food and the different fibers there might be there.
And there's a lot of fiber in the foods that Dan was talking about? Is that the thing that really carries them together?
Yeah, it's really a combination of high fiber foods which feed our microbes, but also polyphenols, which are these chemicals within them that used to be called antioxidants that are also fuel for our gut microbes. And these polyphenols have lots of properties on their own as health-giving properties, but I think their main action is by improving our gut health. And that's how we get all these universal effects. And I'd imagine my research on aging really is sort of pointed to the immune system being pretty critical here. Because if you can have a healthy immune system, then that immune system is repairing your body continuously. It's fighting early cancer, it's repairing the cells, it's making sure that you do live to an old age by picking up problems early. And if that's in perfect condition and it's not fighting inflammation, it's not dealing with obesity, it's really focused on its main job. That is how most of us who do succeed to live a long time are going to do it. So foods that are good for your gut are going to be good for your immune system, and everything we've talked about. It's whole foods, and they're not poisoning their system with ultra-processed foods as well. And I think it's interesting, Dan was telling me that some of these places have lost their veneer that they had, because
meaning
that the places like Okinawa have now been exposed to ultra-processed food, and they're not doing as well as
their diet has changed. Is that what you're saying, Dan?
So their diet has moved from this sort of 100% whole food diets to increasing percentage of ultra-processed foods with chemicals and lower fiber intake, and starting to see an effect on this.
And just to make sure that that I'd understood this right, I think what you're saying is, if you look across the sort of set of foods that Dan was talking about, what you really see is foods that not only have all these polyphenols, which are all of these sort of magic complex chemicals, but they have a lot of fiber, and that critically what you're saying is fiber isn't one thing, which I think is how I always thought about it, and I suspect most listeners think about it, right? You see it on the back of the packet and it says fiber. Actually, I think you're saying there's like 1,000 different sorts of fiber, and that we think that the individual bacteria in our gut actually eat specific fibers. So it's almost like, and that, is that right?
They're very picky. Yeah, they're very specialized and very picky. So that's why the diversity of foods, whether it's even different beans, different colored beans, is going to produce a different set of gut microbes inside you that are going to produce different chemicals that might enhance your immune system even more and help you live longer.
But I will say just a couple refinements on what you said about the blue zones. The blue zones are actually subsets of the countries we're talking about. Like Sardinia, the blue zone in Sardinia is very different than Italy. The blue zone in Sardinia is actually only 6 villages, and they're descendant from a Bronze Age culture. They're matriarchal, like the rest of the Mediterranean's patriarchal, and they have a quite different diet. Same thing with Okinawa. Until 1917, Okinawa wasn't even part of Japan. It was called the Ryukyu's Kingdom, and their diet is completely different. We tend to think of Japanese as fish heavy, but the Okinawans didn't eat very much fish at all. They tended to eat this emo, as I mentioned, tons of tofu, and basically what grew in their garden. And both of these blue zones did not have huge access to a tradition where there was a vast variety of food. They were poor, and they tended to have to eat what was available, what was growing that season. Of course, there were herbs and there were spices. Often they had a kitchen garden. But if you look at the patterns, typically they only had 20 or 30 ingredients at any given time that sort of rolled with the season. So as you went from summer garden to winter garden, those ingredients. But I think it makes it actually less discouraging for people, because you don't have to think about having 100 ingredients. These people stayed very healthy for a long time.
And Dan, I was just thinking, people are quite familiar with Italian food. There'll be a lot more people who say, I don't really know Japanese at all. Could you elaborate a little bit, I guess, on the difference between what these people in these 5 villages in Sardinia are eating versus maybe sort of our traditional idea of what Italian food is? Because I think most of us are like, oh, I eat nothing but Italian food, pizza and pasta. So if that's the secret to my long and healthy life, I'm feeling really good about it.
Yeah, so the diet of longevity in Sardinia is more a verb than a noun, because there were at least 3 phases.
Okay.
Until about 1960, believe it or not, most of what they ate was bread and cheese. These shepherds had several different kinds of bread, sourdough usually, but also a flatbread called carta di musica. They were shepherds, so these men would go into their pastures.
And olive oil, though, wouldn't they?
Olive oil, but not as much as you think. The highlands of Sardinia, the terrain is very rugged and not conducive to the olive groves like you would see. Actually more mastic oil, believe it or not, in the 40s and 50s. But to your point, olive oil is now ubiquitous in Sardinia. In about 1960s, roads came in. And remember, centenarians were alive. They were middle-aged in 1960s.
Amazing.
Their diet shift. They were still poor people, and they relied very heavily on huge gardens. And pasta started to come in. But there's more gnocchi than there is pasta. a lot of dishes made with fava beans, and of course their celebratory food was pork, never beef, very little chicken, but on average about 5 times a month they would eat pork, the family pig.
5 times a month. So this is a
on
very,
average.
very low level of meat eating you're describing.
Very low level. The average
and I
American.
guess if they're in the mountains, they're not eating a lot of fish either.
No. In fact, you can see the ocean from the blue zone of Sardinia. But I met several centenarians that first time they ate fish in their life when they're in their 20s.
Okay.
And that's because it took a day to get to the sea. They didn't have a fishing culture, but maybe they get some fish. But by the time they got it back up to their village, it stunk. So you'd see this sort of dried cod once in a while, bacalao, they called it, and they reconstitute that. But it wasn't. We tend to think fish is associated with longevity, but not a lot of fish in the blue zone.